Dave, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Tim. Good to see you.
Well, we had you on almost 2 years ago to the date, and that was episode 291. We'll link to that one in the show notes. And one thing that stood out from that interview for me, Dave, that I have shared with many other people was your mention of shifting not to retirement, but a quote, preferment phase after over 30
Mm-hmm.
years in academia. Quickly recap for us what you mean by that, the preferment phase, and maybe what's that looked like now 2 years later.
That's a great question. And Preferment, and just to kindly borrow a phrase that many of you know, Lucinda Main, she was
Yeah.
the executive VP at AACP, American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, and I served on their board of directors for a number of years, got to know Lucinda and many other folks at AACP very well. Lucinda and I were kind of on the same timeline in terms of making
Hmm.
this shift, and I know she heard this term from another fellow CEO of another professional association in DC who had the same timeline that she did. Is the sense that when it's time to change paths, so to speak, it wasn't that I was retiring or totally stepping away and sitting back and not doing much of anything. It
Hmm.
was the sense that I am going to in some ways step away, but I'm going to also remain engaged in doing things, particularly things that I really like to do and I value doing. And that was that sense of that's where preferment came from.
Hmm.
I'm doing things that I really prefer to do, both for myself as well as things within our profession. And at the same time, not having the same schedules and the same demands that we did when we
Hmm.
were, working as part of other organizations.
When you say, Dave, doing the things that I really like to do and value to do, we talk often on the show about the importance of, yes, the X's and O's financially, but also finding that way that we can live the rich life today and tomorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we're saying the same thing in a different way. What are those things? So when you think about the preferment phase, we were talking about skiing before we hopped on the show, but
Yep.
what are those things that light you up?
Well, in some ways, they start with the real basics that I think a lot of us have the routines maybe that
Mm,
many of us enjoy. It's interesting as I've moved into this phase, mornings, say when your regular everyday working phase, mornings can be a very hectic, busy time for many families and many people
yeah.
because you're obviously getting ready to get up and go to work and all that kind of stuff. In this phase right now, mornings are actually one of my favorite times of day
Mm,
because it's probably fair to say I ease into my mornings. I have never considered myself a morning person. I'm not one of those people that jumps up and goes on
mhm.
a 10-mile run and then goes off to work or something like that. That was not me. I get up, I do my Sudoku, I do several of the New York Times puzzles, the Wordle, the
Mhm.
connections, that kind of stuff. I have a cup of coffee, I eat my breakfast, I think about what I'm going to do. One of the things that preferment has meant for me is taking better care of myself.
Mm,
And so things like, am I going to go to the gym and do a workout? If the weather's nice, am I going to go out for a nice bike ride?
mhm.
Those types of things. If it's a ski day, am I, yeah, I'll get up and get ready to put my stuff in the car and head off to the mountain and go skiing and all that kind of stuff. Even though, so those things I do in the mornings are not nearly as rushed. They're just basically doing the things that mean something to me and are of value to me and fit well with what I want to do. So from a very personal sense, that's a lot of what preferment is meant to me.
Dave, what I love about that is I think sometimes when we think about retirement or what we're calling here a preferment phase, we have these grandiose vision of these big things, these big experiences, which there is a time and place for
Yeah.
those, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Very much so.
but often I think it's what you're talking about. It's the flexibility of the day and kind of how you spend your time. And, you talk about investing more in yourself and kind of the pace of the morning. Like these are the things that when we talk about living a rich life, that really resonates with me. Like, and by the
Yeah.
way, like those aren't crazy expensive things.
No, no, exactly, exactly. No, no, it's doing my Sudoku and the New York Times crossword and a Wordle and those kind of stuff. Those are pretty inexpensive things to do. Going down to the gym to work out. Yeah,
Yeah.
I pay a little bit for a gym membership, but in the big scheme of things, that's not a
Mhm.
terribly high expense.
Dave, one of the things in our previous conversation that really stood out to me was your mention of how important the early planning was, the foundation bricks that you laid early in your career
Hmm.
that allowed you to get to a point of financial security, allowed you to get to a point of having the option, right? Having this phase that we're talking about. Now that you've been in this season for a bit of time, how has that planning impacted your day to day, right? We talk so much about the accumulation and getting to this
Yeah.
point. We don't talk as
Hmm.
much about well, what actually happens when you retire.
Those are great points because obviously you're still planning, you're
Mhm,
still utilizing financial management and financial management skills. It's not like you get to the end of the road. It's like, okay, yeah, I've got all my money and now I don't have to anything to worry about. You still have to be
mhm,
engaged in plan. Now probably more. Well, let's just say this: I've always been engaged, not just in saving money. I mean, I was reflecting on a. It wasn't in our previous conversation, but I think you had posted this once. Like, what's your favorite fun way to spend money?
mm,
Does everyone has a fun thing they like to spend money on and everything? And I kind of answered that in a kind of a smarty pants way, but it's like my favorite thing to do was actually save money. It
mm,
made me feel good when I actually had some extra money that I knew that I could, and that was that sense of it's going to give me options down the
mhm,
road. Whether it be maybe going on some fun vacation or something like that, or buying something that's important to me, or being able to move into preferment earlier than I probably had planned on doing.
mhm,
And, having done that, save that money really gave me those options. Spending money, of course, spending money is part of life. We all
mhm,
spend money, and managing those skills, the way you keep track of your funds and the kinds of things you spend money on are things that I still pay attention to. I still use Quicken, all the time to basically track my expenses and keep tabs on what's
mhm,
going on. Um, I think it's good to really remain engaged in that. I had a conversation with my financial advisor a few weeks ago as we were going through, as we do most of the time, he goes through the Monte Carlo
mhm,
simulations of, how long is your money going to last under various,
yeah,
situations and that kind of stuff. And his experience has been, one of the things that most people who especially people who retire relatively early, they do get somewhat, I don't know if paranoid is the right word, but they're concerned or somewhat overly concerned about running out of money.
yes,
Everyone thinks,
mhm,
oh my god, I got to be really really careful, I'm going to run out of money. And my financial advisor basically told me, sit back, Dave, take a deep breath. You're not going to run out of money.
mhm,
And here's why you're not going to run out of money: because you never ran out of money before.
mhm.
And you're not, unless you turn into some different person
Person,
who
yeah,
starts spending money in a
mhm,
different way, you're not going to run out of money. I mean, yeah, maybe the markets go up and down, maybe your resources become different. You know what we all do in situations like that? We adjust.
mhm,
One of the good things, I guess, about our lives, I mean, both myself and my wife were both pharmacists, so we were fortunate to have a fair amount of resources to be able to work with. And when those resources are working with us, we're enables us to do some really nice
mhm,
things, and that's great. If for whatever reason those resources were not available to us, we have a fair amount of, let's say, discretionary in
yeah,
there, and we can certainly cut back on those discretionaries if we had to, and focus on what are the real absolute needs. And like I said, I'm not really worried. If anything, one of the conversations that my advisor has been having with us is reminding us, it's okay to spend a little bit more money.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
okay to, go on that trip or do those things. Or, our big thing this last year was buying a generator. There's an exciting way to spend twenty thousand
Yeah.
dollars, but it's actually something that was important, especially given our move that we made over this past year, moving from Colorado to Maine.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're mentioning this behavior of learning how to spend on some level, while at the same time, like, Dave's not gonna become a different person that got him to this point, right? And I think that's
Hmm.
important that we objectively look at the facts, not only in the Monte Carlo simulation, but also in, like, how have you gotten to this point?
Exactly, exactly. I got to this point because, yeah, I saved money and I was
Mhm,
judicious with how we spent it, and I remain that way.
mhm.
Those things have not changed because I've moved into the preferment stage.
Since you mentioned Colorado and the move and coming back to the Northeast, let's talk about that because we had a really good brief conversation before we recorded about, yes, it's the X's and O's when we talk about retirement, but it's also about, community for many people. And everyone's
Hmm.
plan is a little bit different. And for some, it's, hey, let's get to the warm weather and be a snowbird. And that's a good fit. Others, we're joking. It's, hey, let's get in the RV and travel and see the country. That's a good
Hmm.
fit. But for many
Yeah.
other people, it's, hey, what is the sense of community and why is that important to us? And I think your move to Colorado and then your move back to the Northeast is a really good example of that.
That's a great example of that. I'll go back in time, 2, 3 years, when we first started thinking about, going down this path, and my wife and I were having conversations about where did we want to be. It's funny, we lived in Boston for a number of years and had originally thought, yeah, we're probably going to end up in Maine somewhere in retirement and all that kind of stuff. And we were out driving around one day, and my wife was like, well, why don't we check out Colorado? Is in Denver is a place to
Mhm.
retire. And it's like, I love to ski. That would be great. And we did. And so we made the move out to Colorado. And let's say, obviously, there are a lot of positives about Colorado, especially from a skiing standpoint and being out in nature and
Yeah.
all kinds of things. But there were things that we really missed too. And I think that sense of, having been in particularly the Northeast for as long as we had, there were a lot of things that we missed about the Northeast, and you know, again, I consider ourselves very fortunate in that we made this decision to move out to Colorado, and then a couple of years later, we made a
Mhm.
decision to move back, and I'm glad that we did that. We for didn't feel locked into our original choice. We are happy, very happy to be back to the Northeast. We do have you know community here.
Mhm.
Between folks we knew in Boston and folks we knew in other parts of the mid Northeast. We've had people come and visit us here. I mean, I was joking. We had more people probably visit us in our first 2 months in Maine than we did in our 2 years in
Mhm.
Colorado, and so it was just nice to be able to host people here. We did something here when we moved to Maine that we had not done in my wife and I's essentially 35 years of being together, and that was actually build a house. The house that
Mm.
we are here in Maine is we worked with a builder and essentially designed and built
That's cool.
something literally from the ground up.
Mhm.
It was kind of good. I feel very happy that we waited that long, to
Mhm.
do that. I know a lot of people build new houses fairly early on and that kind of stuff. And, sometimes, let's just say it helps to know what you want
What?
as well as
Mhm.
to know what you don't want
Mhm.
when you build a home. And that's probably a conversation for a whole nother episode of,
Mhm.
your podcast, of people that are thinking about building homes, and what goes into that process. And I'd love to be part of that if you'd ever want to go down that road. But yeah, we moved here back to the Northeast and built a home. It took about a year to get that home built, but and we've been here since last May, and are really really happy to be back.
David, talk about your decision to stay engaged in consulting work while your financial plan doesn't require it. You just talked about your
Hmm.
conversation with your advisor. It's going to be okay. You've
Yep.
made an intentional decision to stay engaged in doing consulting work?
Yeah, I'll say what part of it goes back to what we were just talking about with community, and we
Mhm.
have various different types of community. I mean, for many of us, it's our friends and neighbors and people that we knew in the areas where we lived and that kind of stuff. A community that's very important to me is the higher education community, and
Mhm.
particularly the pharmacy education community. I mean, it was a very important part of my being for essentially 35
Mhm.
years. And there are many folks within that community that I'm still very much connected to, and I stay engaged with them. And now in some ways that staying engaged is through doing little bits of teaching. I
Mhm.
still have colleagues at various. I think this last year I um, taught anywhere between 1 and 6 courses at, what was it, 6 different
Oh,
universities.
cool. Mhm.
So, and much of that online. Some of it I actually did go, visit campuses, and that's I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate that. I like the teaching in person
Mhm.
as opposed to what so many of us have done over Zoom and all that kind of stuff over the pandemic. So getting back into classrooms and physically meeting with students. Other a couple of universities I've been working as a consulting, doing some faculty development work, doing some leadership development work. Again, it keeps me engaged and involved. We and our listeners know that there are challenges, and very significant challenges, in pharmacy, and particularly pharmacy education right
Mhm.
now. And what one of the things I recognize as a consultant is I don't have all of the answers. I don't have a magic wand. I'm not, bringing me in as a consultant is not going to make your problems go away. But what I do bring is a perspective. I bring a
Mhm.
perspective. I bring an experience. I can help others who are dealing with issues similar to what I and,
Mhm.
and other experienced leaders have dealt with over the course of our careers, and we share a little bit about what we've learned. And at the end of the day, I especially when you're a consultant, I recognize what I am and what I'm not.
Mhm.
And what I'm not is a savior. I'm not somebody who comes in and solves all the problems. What I do bring is a perspective, and at the end of the day, I take a step back and say, ultimately, this is your problem to solve. It's not my
Mhm.
problem to solve. I'll provide you with this information and this feedback and this help. And at the end of the day, you on your end are going to decide what you want to do. And I guess that's another nice thing about being in the preferment stage of life is I've gotten very good at saying that's not my problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Or here's what I
Yeah.
can do and I can't do, right?
Here's what I can do, and here's what I
Yeah.
can't do or won't do. So,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things from the teaching, I mean, I've made a conscious decision. I've had colleagues at other universities come to me and say, "Hey, Dave, would you like to teach this course? Not just a lecture or two, but come in and
Mhm.
teach an entire course." And that's something I've taken a step back from and say, "No, I won't do that. I don't
Mhm.
want to be in charge of all of
Mhm.
the aspects that are involved, because teaching a course is, as you well know, is so much more than just
Yeah.
coming into a classroom and giving lectures.
You've served your time
And
there. You've done
yeah,
it.
exactly. And that's, yeah, no, that's not an area that I want to be involved in
Yeah.
anymore. Yeah.
And your story is such a good one, Dave, for me, and it's an inspiration to me when I think about retirement. I don't foresee a point in time, outside of health concerns or something that doesn't allow me to
Hmm.
work, of not doing, something. Money aside,
Yeah.
I just value that feeling of being engaged, of contributing. And it's a two-way street, right? So when you're consulting
Hmm.
with universities, whether you're teaching or, consulting with the leadership teams, whatever you may be doing, of course, you're providing your experience and offering value. But that's a two-way street back to you of that sense of feeling of contribution. And hey, you built a career and have gained these experiences and skills. And to be able to share those,
Yeah.
yes, you're gonna get paid for it as a consultant, but I would argue there's perhaps even a greater value that comes from a sense of contribution.
Yeah, no, I mean, it all comes down to, I mean, I have a pretty simple mantra these days. I mean, I want to do things that I value, and I want what I do to be valued by others.
Mm,
I mean, and there's all kinds of ways to define value. I mean, there's what one gets paid, of course, but there's other things that you and I both do that maybe the sense of value isn't in what we get paid for doing, but it's in how we're making that contribution.
yeah.
And is that contribution important to yourself? And is that contribution important to the others that you work with?
Hmm.
And, so long as I feel that sense of value, I choose to engage myself.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, there are places where I no longer feel that sense of value, and I have made conscientious efforts to step away
Hmm.
from those things. I don't. Again, it's very nice being at a point in your life where you don't feel you have
Have to.
to do
Hmm.
something.
Yeah. Dave, I remember probably 3 months or so ago, you and I had touched base, and one of the things you mentioned was how stark of a transition it was to go into retirement where you're no longer day in, day out interacting with colleagues.
Hmm.
And I know that shifted a little bit with the pandemic. Maybe that was
Yep.
a little bit of an off ramp, and reduced that. But tell us more about that. Was there anything else that really surprised you about the transition?
Well, I was gonna say when I think about the transition, I mean, on one hand, again, I think about mornings and working out and
Yeah.
taking better care of myself and all those good things that I know that I'm doing a better job of now than I was doing before. Um, Maybe one of the aspects of the transition that has been more challenging is feeling like you are part of something that is important or has a higher
Mm,
purpose.
mm,
When we most of us when we work within our jobs or careers, we are working as part of
mhm.
organizations, and there's a reason we're there. We want to be there. We want to contribute to something that we know is bigger than ourselves, whether it be taking care of patients or educating students or doing the research that we're involved in and that kind of stuff. We know that there's that higher, bigger purpose to what it is that we're doing. And as you transition into retirement preferment, you're kind of stepping away from that.
Mhm.
And one of the things I had this realization a few months ago, and you know we think about our spheres of influence, and when I was doing my work in higher education, there's a lot of value that's put into how big that sphere of
Yes.
influence is, and
Mhm.
how many people are you influencing, what types of influence are you having on them, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, as I've made this transition, one thing you have to realize is, for the vast majority of us, our spheres of influence are, if anything, becoming smaller
Mm,
as we step away, as we make that transition. I'm no longer, in a position to, influence as many people or, make as many decisions
yeah.
that I had previously. And I've come to realize that's okay.
Mm,
Because the people that I do have influence with, and the people that I am, shall we say, involved with, is a smaller group of people, but in some ways we have deeper and more meaningful types of
mhm,
relationships. The people that come and visit us here in Maine, the people that I
mhm.
go and visit in other places, and that kind of stuff. They're the people that we have really made conscientious decisions about staying engaged and involved with. And
Mhm.
I'm not going to name names here. I mean, those people know who they are, and I know who they are, and we make very much um, decisions to be part of each other's
Mhm.
lives. And I can't begin to tell you how much I value those relationships, and I get the sense that those people value me. That's why they choose to have me involved in their circles as well. And again, as we I'm now I judge not so much about what's the number of people that I influence or the number of clicks that I get or
Yeah.
anything like that. It's just how much do I value the ones that are really, really important to me.
Yeah, what I'm hearing there, Dave, is depth over volume, right?
Very
Obviously,
much so.
in
Very much so.
the
Very
role that
much
you
so.
were in, you had a significant opportunity at the institution level, at the association level with your involvement to have a volume impact, and not to
Yep.
say you also didn't have a depth of impact. Of course you did, but here we're talking about a more intimate number of individuals with an opportunity to go much deeper. So that's
Yep.
beautiful. I do want to talk about X's and O's for a moment. And you retired at a time, as we often say, that the time at when someone retires is one of the most important decisions they're going to make.
Yes, it
And
is.
there are things that are out of our control sometimes, but there are things that are in our control. Like, how have we
Mhm.
prepared for entering into something like a volatile market? And while you retired into a market that has continued to overall trend up, it's had its fair share of volatility. And so
Yeah.
how have you planned for that in advance, and how has that played out so that the volatility really isn't impacting you a whole lot?
One of the things I'll go back to, and I know this is something I touched on in the previous podcast, is the important role of working with others, including financial advisors. There's a tax advisor that I
Mhm.
also have for many, many years. My tax advisor was actually my father. My father, while he's still alive and is still doing others people's taxes, I have a good laugh. He actually dropped me as a client. The year that my wife and I had three different state taxes to file in addition to our federal, and move to from one part of the country to another part of the country, that kind of stuff. My dad said, you know what, I've
No
had enough.
thanks.
You find
Mhm.
yourself somebody with, who can help you deal with all of the different things and that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. And so it's important to work with those things. I mean, we're pharmacists, we're smart people. We like to think that we can do a lot of this work ourselves, and we do a lot of this lifting ourselves. But there's also things that are very, very helpful to get
Yeah.
advice on that are not inherent to who we are, the kind of work that we do. And I have certainly come to appreciate the contributions that our financial advisor has had, Tom Farmer, that our tax person has had. They give me information that's very, very helpful. So that you don't necessarily have to, shall we say, worry about a volatile market.
Mm. Mhm.
Starting with, let's say, the value of having some cash sitting around,
Mhm.
so that one of the realities of life, of course, whether you're retired or not, is you will have expenses,
Yeah.
and you will need cash for those expenses. And so how you deal with having that cash and where that cash is and how accessible it is to you, and those types of things. I've gotten very good advice over the course of the years, um, from the folks that I work with, and they've really helped us, not worry about,
Mhm.
gee, yeah, the market went up 2% the other day or down 3% the other day or something like that. I don't worry about, gee, do I have to time that out or anything
Yes.
like that. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, timing is important, and you always want to sell into an up market, so to speak. Um, and so the good news is, yeah, making sure that you have a cash reserve set aside so that you've got the cash when you need it, and when you need
Mhm.
to raise some more cash, you can have the luxury of waiting until, yeah, the market's doing a little bit better. Let's sell off some assets now, and then keep that back in our cash reserves.
Mhm. The visual that's coming to mind for me, Dave, as you're talking and thinking back to our previous interview is, if we think about your nest egg, you've built this bubble kind of around it to protect it and to give you some options and flexibility of if or when you need to pull from it, right? It's the cash on
Hmm.
hand. It's the consulting work that you've been doing. Obviously, the
Yep.
hard work and diligence that you've done to maintaining a lifestyle that you have, some margin, month to month. And in 292, you talked about, what was your WTF fund and
Yep.
how your emergency fund that thankfully you didn't have to pull from very much was able to just grow, grow, grow. You didn't borrow from it. And then eventually that
Hmm.
became an important cash resource when you got into
It
retirement.
is, and essentially, it's when we think about a nest egg, of course, a nest egg is no one single asset
Yes.
for most of us. It's a variety of assets.
Hmm.
It was the WTF fund. It's our base retirement savings funds. It was equity that we had in real estate and other types of assets. For us, there's some life insurance assets in there as well. There's a variety of different assets,
Hmm.
and good news is, I mean, we had retirement savings. We have not touched a single dime of those retirement savings yet, and that's by plan. We're honestly the other assets that we had that allowed us to make this transition. The plan was that we would have 5 to 7 years of assets
Mm-hmm.
set aside before we would even think about starting to utilize our retirement assets, and that's still very much the plan. We're sitting here right now, still in essence using the WTF fund to
Hmm.
finance what our life is now. And in terms of real estate, yeah, we were able to make the transition from Massachusetts to Colorado back here to Maine, essentially working within the equity envelope of the real estate
Hmm.
that we owned, and still work within that envelope. It's making this move did not create additional obligations or additional expenses. Really, we're honestly, the cost of living in Maine is even a little bit lower than what the
Hmm.
cost of living in Colorado was. So we're, net probably even coming out ahead a little bit, even though we had, of course, expenses involved in making that transition.
I think I'm gonna rename, Dave, my emergency fund bucket, my WTF fund, because what I like about calling it that is it's a mindset shift, right? Because when things
Mm-hmm.
happen, you know, I'm thinking about an issue we've got going on right now with our roof. And, it's those moments, especially when you're working
Yeah.
so hard on other goals, that if we have prepared for that and we can be somewhat lighthearted about it, which like, that sucks, but let's
Mm-hmm.
write the check and move on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yep.
totally
Yep.
different mindset shift than like, ugh, like I'm so
Well,
mad and
again,
frustrated.
I'll go back to one of the things I mentioned a little bit earlier. I mean, my wife and I is not exactly the sexiest or most desirable purchase that we made over the course of a year, but we made a decision to buy a whole house generator
Hmm.
for this house. And one of the things we learned relatively quickly after moving to Maine is the power goes out, and the power may go out for days at a time. And you want to be prepared for
Yeah.
that. And yeah, one could go down to Costco and buy just a little generator that might keep your house, keep something going, or something like, hey, keep your refrigerator running or something like that. But that's probably not what you really wanted to rely
Hmm.
on or depend on. So we did buy a whole house generator, and
Hmm.
yeah, there were expenses involved in getting the generator and having it professionally installed and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I was happy that, yeah,
Yeah.
not only that we could do that, but we just had the resources to be able to do that. Um, Going back to even the major decision about we made about when to retire. One thing I reflect on, most of us don't, or it's interesting. A lot of us think, yeah, I'm gonna work to age 65 or 67, and if you do that, that's great. I think in our case, we had just both gotten to a point where our personal values, let's say, were increasingly becoming different than those things that were valued by our employers. And there was not much that either of us were going to do to change how our employers actually did things. The only people we could actually influence or change were ourselves.
Mm.
And the decisions we made was to consciously step away. And we, again, our ability to be able to do that was predicated by a large amount by the fact that we did have a fund set aside that said was, yeah, maybe originally was like if there was some emergency pop up or something like that. Like I said, we were
Hmm.
very fortunate. We never had that emergency. The fund kept growing, and at the end of the day, the fund was such that it provided us with a bridge to be able to step into preferment maybe a bit earlier
Hmm.
than either of us had originally envisioned. And at the end of the day, I was really, really happy that we had that fund.
Dave, a subtle but important thing I'm picking up on is the frequency of the we and our language. And I bring this up because I would remiss if I didn't ask, transitioning into retirement for couples, it's a household decision. And
Yes.
sometimes those
Hmm.
timelines align, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people are on the same page, sometimes there's not. And everyone's situation, of course, is different. But any wisdom you can shed there in terms of how you have navigated this?
In terms of how we navigated it, it was interesting because I think for many, many years, my wife and I had actually quite different visions about how we were going to approach this. Retirement was probably something, and retirement and financial planning was probably fair to say a little bit more on my radar than it was on my wife's. My father was a good example for me in that he too retired relatively early, age 57, and 27, 28 years later is still around and is still retired and still doing what he likes doing and is doing very well. And that was a great example for me. I think my wife originally was going to had every intention on keeping on working even after I took a step back. It's fair to say then COVID happened.
Mm,
And,
hmm.
for all of us that work in healthcare and work in
Yeah.
healthcare fields, that was a real seminal event
Hmm.
for a lot of people. And it was interesting, while I, as a college professor, made this transition and was, all of a sudden started working from home and doing Zoom
Yep.
meetings and all that kind of stuff. Um, which had its own set of challenges. My wife was a pharmacist at a hospital, and as we all likely know, hospitals kept working
Hmm.
during the pandemic, and those people that worked at hospitals kept on going in, and which of course had its own set of challenges. And I think going through those challenges really changed my wife's mindset as well in terms of
Yeah.
how much longer do I want to keep doing this, and do I feel valued by
Hmm.
the organization that I work for. And we as 2021, 2022 is happening, I think we both increasingly we're on the same page that
Hmm.
this is a good time to make that switch. And we know that there have been many others of us that have joined us. If anything, it has created, I'll say, one challenge in retirement and moving from one part of a country
Hmm.
to another part, now back to this part, is finding healthcare. We know that there have been many other healthcare professionals that have taken the last few years and have said, "Yeah, I'm going to step away,"
Yes.
and that has, of course, created some challenges for a healthcare system that was challenged to start with
Yep.
in many ways. And so, yeah, if there's been a challenge, it's been getting health insurance, finding healthcare providers,
Hmm.
getting appointments with those healthcare
Hmm.
providers, and all that kind of stuff. But again, that could be a whole nother
Yeah.
show for another day.
My last question for you, and actually it's going to be somewhat of a rapid fire. I'm going to put you on the hot seat. I didn't give you a heads up about this one, but I think it's so
Okay.
important that we lean on your wisdom as we think about our listeners in different phases of their career. So, Dave, I'm thinking about three groups. Obviously, everyone's on their own path, but I'm thinking about those that are in the first 5 to 10 years, new practitioners,
Hmm.
those that are in the middle of their career, and then those that are coming up on retirement in the next 5 or so years. And so let's start with those that are on that front part of their career, first 5 to 7 years, new practitioners. They're facing, significant amounts of student loan debt,
Yeah.
expensive phase of life, might be starting a
Hmm.
family, trying to buy a home, getting started
Exactly.
with investing, all these things. What advice would you have for that group?
Start early,
Mm,
jump in, don't be afraid. I mean, yes, you do have obligations, particularly student loan debt and everything that you are going to have to take care of, and do take care of those things, but get into the habit of saving money, being mindful of how you spend money, and that's not to say don't do things that you want to do. It's not just about taking care of your needs. It's about having your wants, and making sure that you're taking care of those as
hmm.
well. But jump it, don't. don't get into or paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
Don't you know basically say, oh my god, there's all these things that I have
Hmm.
to do, and then at the end of the day you end up not doing anything. Jump in.
How about those pharmacists, Dave, like myself, in that midpoint of their career where they're looking at retirement and it's still perhaps off in the distance, but they can feel it. It's coming.
Hmm.
Often in a very expensive, phase of life.
Yep.
Maybe the student loans are gone, maybe they're not.
Yep.
I think about our situation, four kids in the house, expenses are high. We're thinking about kids' college. We're maybe perhaps some listeners, they've got elderly parents, they've got
Yep.
young kids, or they're kind of in that middle. What about advice for them?
Have a plan, develop a plan, and then let that plan work out.
Mm,
One of the things that really helped us was, shall we say, being able to save for retirement, to do things without having to make a lot of day-to-day conscious decisions. I mean, for example, most of us work for organizations where we can set aside money
hmm.
and have that money, basically, it's going to go into certain pots and it's going to work and do certain things, and just so have a plan, let it do that.
Hmm.
Don't necessarily, you're right, we all, people in the middle of their careers have very, very busy lives and a lot of other obligations, and so the less, the less that you have to even think about, financial management is probably a good thing at this
Yeah.
stage of your life. Yet still having that plan in place. I'm not saying don't be engaged in financial management and don't do these things, but have a pathway or a plan such that, try to make things as automatic as
Hmm.
possible so that you don't have to put a lot of day-to-day effort into managing these things.
Amen. Decision fatigue is real. It's emotionally taxing. And as
Hmm.
you just said so well, like put the plan in place and then automate it. So important.
Yep.
And Dave, that final group, those coming up on retirement, maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, about to make that transition. Yes, financially, but also for the things beyond the
Hmm.
numbers. What advice would you have for that group?
Take some time to think about what you want your life to be moving forward. I mean, there is, most of us are not in situations where we have to
Hmm.
retire or step away at a certain time, at a certain date. To those folks that are still really enjoying what they are doing every day, if that's what makes you you, then do that. Keep doing
Hmm.
that. I guess in some ways, when it comes down to it, have that conversation with yourself. What makes you you? What is it that
Hmm.
that you really value and is really important? Is it time with your spouse, time with your family, time taking care of yourself, your community? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be with? Ask yourself those types of
Hmm.
questions, and then think about how do you make those things happen. um, I'll say, people in our age frame right now, is the ones that are getting later in our careers and so forth. Um, we still have a variety of obligations we think about too. One of the things that I think is very incumbent upon many of us in our age gauge, we're fortunate in many ways, and it's that many of us still have parents around and so forth, but they are aging.
Hmm.
And one of the things we see is, my wife's mother passed away about a month ago, and you're constantly reminded of nothing is
Hmm.
forever, and
Hmm.
you do want to make sure that you are taking the time to spend time with people who are important to you, and to do the things that are important to you, whether it
Hmm.
maybe be take that big trip or go spend time with family or whatever, because you do realize, even though we plan for, yeah, retirement could be 20, 30, 40 years, nothing's
That's
guaranteed,
right.
nothing will be forever.
Yeah.
And so I think as you approach, moving into making that transition with the mindset of, who do I want to be, what's important
Hmm.
to me, what are my values, and then how do I live those values. That's certainly been our mindset as we've approached, especially the last 2 3 years,
Hmm.
and I anticipate that's what it's going to be as we continue moving forward.
Dave, such wisdom there. Really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. I know you've been an inspiration to me, and this is certainly going to be valuable to our listeners in our community. So, again, thank you so much, and looking forward to following up in the future again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. Again, you provide such a wonderful service to so many of us in our profession and beyond. You know, there's so many people that can benefit from the type of work that you do, and I'm just happy to be part of it.
Hmm. Thank you, Dave. Take care.